As we reported earlier, thousands of protesters have taken to the streets in Cuba, expressing a variety of frustrations from food shortages to the handling of coronavirus. But unfortunately, some of the Cuban diaspora in South Florida are calling for some pretty extreme measures by the United States toward the government of Cuba. One interview featuring the Miami mayor, Francis Suarez, gives you a little sense of what they're looking for. And for any of you who might think that the only role of the United States should be lifting the Cuban embargo and the sanctions, which I agree with, understand that Mayor Francis Suarez thinks, no, those sanctions should stay in place. Here he is.
Ben Rhodes, who of course was national security advisor to President Obama, tweeted this: the Cuban people suffer doubly from a repressive government and a cruel US embargo. They deserve policies that empower them and help them improve their lives. Do you think that President Biden, looking at this situation, will lift that embargo? And do you think that's what he should do?
No, I don't think the embargo is cruel at all. And I think that the Cuban people are not asking for a lifting of the embargo. They're going out on the streets every single day talking about the failure of the communist regime to provide for its people.
So, I mean, look, it's interesting because you listen to interviews of the protesters, and are there people within that group protesting who have an issue with the Cuban government? Yes, right? But you also hear problems with inflation, food shortages. Obviously, COVID has been a pretty big disaster for countries like Cuba. The lack of tourism, which is a huge source of revenue for Cuba, it has hurt them. And then you have the US sanctions, which of course hurt the economy and the Cuban people, but they don't want the lifting of sanctions. They want to crush Cubans, so they're so desperate that they rise up and try to overthrow the government. What people like Suarez want is regime change in Cuba. That's what they want, right? And he goes even further and calls for literal airstrikes, which I'll get to in just a second. But Cenk, why don't you jump in first?
Yeah, I love when politicians in America pretend to speak for the people of another country without ever actually talking to them, knowing anything about it. Whenever you hear people say, and also of this country, the American people want this, the Cuban people want that. If you back it up with a poll, great, then I believe you, or at least we're having a conversation. But no, without any facts or knowledge, he's like, oh, I'm a right winger, and I get votes from Little Havana and in Miami from the Cubans that live here, who all left Cuba and despise the Cuban government by telling him how terrible the Cuban government is. So I will come here and pretend that I've spoken to all the Cuban people, and they tell me that they love the embargo. They might hate their own government, and they would be right to, the people that are protesting now. But the idea that they're in favor of the embargo is preposterous. It's starving them, and it's preventing medicine from coming and saving the lives of their family members. And so they're frustrated at their government that they haven't gotten the medicine to them. But if you told them, hey, America's also blocking medicine that could save your aunt's life or your mom's life, my guess is they wouldn't be like, oh, thank you so much, America. That mayor in Miami speaks for me as my mom is dying because of the American embargo. No, he's a liar. He didn't talk to anybody there. Of course he's lying.
Right, and keep in mind that the embargo and the sanctions, many think that it's just between the United States and Cuba, but the United States pressures its allies to avoid doing any trade with Cuba. Some of our allies take the risk anyway, but the actions of the Trump administration went further than what the embargo initially was. And one of the things that the Cuban diaspora is not allowed to do now is send or wire US currency to their family members in Cuba. So it is harming Cuban residents, but they don't care. I mean, they like that this is pressure. This is applying pressure or creating an environment in which people get so desperate that they'll rise up and push for regime change. I mean, it is a form of intervention, really, when you think about it. You don't need boots on the ground and you don't need airstrikes for US intervention to happen. It's already happening in the form of these economic sanctions.
Anna, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm sure the Miami mayor is right when the money that they could get to help save their family is blocked by the American government, they thank the American government. They're like, oh, thank you for blocking the money that was gonna come to me. It's not like my family needed it. It's not like we're in dire straits here. Oh, I thank you so much for blocking it. That's what this moron claims that they think. Of course they don't think that, but it's about to get much worse.
And so I gave you an example of intervention when it's in the form of economic sanctions, but no, Suarez wants to go much further than that. So let's watch.
And what should be being contemplated right now is a coalition of potential military action in Cuba, similar to what has happened in both administrations, in both Republican and Democrat administrations. In Republican with Bush in Panama, they deposed Noriega, and that country had peaceful democracy for decades. And you had interventions by Democratic presidents, taking out Osama bin Laden in Pakistan. It's a sovereign country where they took out a terrorist that probably saved thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of lives. And President Clinton in Kosovo, intervening in a humanitarian issue with airstrikes. So there have been many opportunities in the history.
Are you suggesting airstrikes in Cuba?
What I'm suggesting is that option is one that has to be explored and cannot be just simply discarded as an option that is not on the table.
That is an option that has to be explored because US intervention with the goal of regime change has worked out so well in other countries. By the way, especially Latin American countries like Guatemala, where the CIA backed a coup, overthrowing a democratically elected leader for US business interests. Chiquita Banana, which was United Fruit at the time. I mean, it's just, do you guys understand what happens after the US, first of all, innocent civilians die, okay, that's point number one. Point number two, this is all about essentially taking bits and pieces of Cuba and privatizing it. You see it happen over and over again. Read Naomi Klein's shock doctrine. It happened in Russia after the fall of the Soviet Union. That's not being an apologist for the Soviet Union, but it's also acknowledging what business interests did in taking nationalized parts of that country, privatizing it, and then of course exploiting the resources in that country, again, for business interests to the detriment of people living in Russia. You see it happen in Guatemala. You see it happen in so many other contexts. And to call for airstrikes, I mean, it's just so stupid. And I'm sick of this narrative among some Americans and certainly among politicians regarding what the United States needs to do to overthrow governments that it doesn't like. I think the people of Cuba should make that decision. I think the United States should lift the economic sanctions and make the economic situation a little easier for people who are struggling during a global pandemic. But that should be the only role of the United States. The idea of doing airstrikes or military intervention is just sick.
So, I wonder which country we most spectacularly failed in intervening in. Oh, right, Cuba. Remember the Bay of Pigs? So how did that intervention turn out? So now morons are back to, hey, let's try the Bay of Pigs again. And then which country did we have a giant standoff where we thought we might start a nuclear war because we threatened to bomb them? Oh, right, Cuba. That was the Cuban Missile Crisis. Now we're back to that as if none of that happened. As if Bay of Pigs didn't happen, the Cuban Missile Crisis didn't happen. The moron mayor of Miami comes out and goes, oh yeah, maybe we should bomb the living crap out of Cuba. That's a great idea. I bet that would win the people over. So when I posted about it on social media, right-wingers jump in and go, no, it's okay, Cenk. It's going to be precision strikes.
Oh yeah. We're so good at precision strikes.
And just like we did in Iraq, we had precision strikes all over Iraq for decade after decade, and same with Afghanistan. So many precision strikes, and that resolved itself so well, didn't it? So they say, oh no, we're going to only hit the military and the cops and other infrastructure, of course, and people who die are of course all collateral damage. And we had to burn Cuba to save Cuba, of course. So maybe we should go back to the idea of bombing Cuba, and I bet it doesn't start any bigger conflict, and I bet it doesn't kill the civilians of Cuba. Nah, you're all monsters, man. So we fought against the Iraq war tooth and nail. There was only 2 shows, national shows on air that did that: Democracy Now! And the Young Turks. And we couldn't prevent that war. We fought tooth and nail against invading Iran. We did prevent that for the moment being, okay? Everybody combined, not just us, obviously, right? A lot of people were opposed to going to Iran. And now here we are, now back at Cuba.
Yeah.
Our most disastrous intervention of all. And now we've got mayors of major cities saying, yeah, let's just bomb them and see what happens.
I want to read 2 excerpts from a piece written by Ben Burgess in Jacobin about this very issue, because I think he also provides another example of how US meddling is a bad idea. He writes, to see what kind of government US meddling would produce, look at neighboring Haiti, whose president the United States Marines removed in 2004. Anyone who believes US intervention in Cuba would bring about a stable, prosperous, liberal democracy first needs to explain why Haiti is racked by dystopian levels of poverty, inequality, corruption, and political violence. And in regard to the sanctions, the US sanctions on Cuba, the international community is against us on that. In fact, last month, the United Nations voted overwhelmingly to call on the United States to lift the embargo. Only the United States and Israel voted no. Ukraine, Colombia, and Jair Bolsonaro's Brazil were the only abstentions, and 184 nations voted yes.
When it comes to being enormously cruel to a population, Israel and the United States are #1 again. Occupy the Palestinians, bomb the Cubans, starve them, make sure they don't get medicine. By the way, where's another embargo which starves and takes away the health of its citizens in the Gaza Strip? So what's good for the Palestinians is good for the Cubans, the United States and Israel say. When the whole world is against you, maybe you should double check your position. And by the way, the person who put the embargo back is Trump. The person who's loving it and celebrating it now is Joe Biden. What happened? I thought we were supposed to get a difference, right? So now look, we're not naive. Trump is a fascist and wanted to end democracy, okay? But we're also not naive in the opposite direction, where, if Joe Biden says it, he probably means it. No, this is when you're supposed to hold him accountable. But of course, no one in the press is willing to do that. They just let him violate every campaign promise and call him FDR 2.0 anyway. Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.